I now feel honored to introduce Professor Navjivan Rastogi ji, a scholar known for his intellectual integrity, depth, and commitment. He hails from the illustrious lineage of Dr. K.C. Pandey, who during early 20th century discovered Abhinavagupta as a great Kashmir Shaiva philosopher and master aesthetic thinker to the World Academy. He retired from Lucknow University as the professor and chair of Sanskrit and honorary director, Abhinavagupta Institute of Aesthetics and Shaiva Philosophy 24 years ago. With the publication of his Krama Tantraloka Volume 1 in 1979, Rastogi's academic prowess came to be widely noticed. He is also known for his other publications such as Introduction to the Tantraloka, a study in structure, and Tantric philosophy of Abhinavagupta. He began the first systematic attempt towards unraveling the epistemological theorizing in Shaiva non-dualism of Kashmir. He has also edited Tantraloka with Viveka of Jairatha in 8 volumes, as well as Abhinavagupta, Perspectives on Abhinavagupta, Studies in Memory of K.C. Pandey, jointly with Meera Rastogi. Kalikrama and Abhinavagupta, the epistemological ethos of a tantric tradition and world index of the Tantraloka are his 2 latest publications. At present, Rastogi is focused on re-editing Ishwar Pratibhijna Sutra Vimarshani Vyakhya and Itaru unpublished commentary on Abhinavagupta's Ishwar Pratibhijna Vimarshani. He was honored with the prestigious Sharada Samman and was twice felicitated by his alma mater, once in 2006 and then in the centenary year of 2020 for his contribution to the university's lived knowledge tradition of light and learning. He's been nominated by the Indian Council for Philosophical Research as its National Fellow for the year 2020, working on Pratibhijna Pramana Darshana, meta-epistemology of Pratibhijna School. I invite Navjivan Rastogi to deliver his presentation on Situating Abhinavagupta in Mainstream Indian Philosophy. Rastogi, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Dimple ji. Tarvatra bhav patleno vijrimbhamano vichhed shunya paramartha chamatkratirya tam purna vrityahamiti prathana swahavam swatma sthitim sarasatah pranamami devim abhasa pratibhasa tadvirhayosh chitratmanosh chanchala स्वातंत्र्यादव भास्वरस्वपुषोस्त्यक्तक्रमं या स्थितिः तत्संवेदन सागरस्य विलसच्चन्द्रार्धशोभाभृतो रूपं भाव विभाकृतामयमहं नित्योदितं संस्तुवे. Professor Nagaraj Paturi ji, thank you for your brilliant welcome, very soulful, enriching welcome, and making our task very easier, lighter. Ms. Dimple Kaul, eminent co-panelists, young scholars, and learned audience. Today is a very special day in many respects. You see, it is one of the days of the first decade of the millennial centenary of Abhinavagupta. So, I mean, it is virtually, literally, historically, this is the first decade after 1,000 years. So, because Abhinavagupta penned his last work on in 10,015. So, in 10,015, so that's why I'm saying it is 2023 we are here. And so it is the first decade of the millennial century. Then again, in a political, there is a change in the political environment in Kashmir with the removal of 370. So that also makes this, I mean, today's day important. Now, another day for which this is very important because the new Sansad Bhavan is being dedicated to the nation. And of course, this is the birds. I mean, today we are also celebrating the birthday of Veer Savarkar. So, I mean, these are so many things. And as Dimple ji mentioned, that 2 days away we are going to have Abhinavagupta's, we can call it birthday or Jayanti. So, these are, I mean, I think Professor Nagaraj Paturi made a very important, very pertinent point, and it might not be presumptuous on my part to say. In fact, I think this is very necessary to discover these paradigms in Abhinavagupta's thought, particularly. And my today's presentation is also in that direction, because what I'm trying to do today is that trying to find out how we situate Abhinavagupta. I mean, how do we situate his? If I can borrow a term from our own Indic terminology, how can we take his prasthanic identity in the mainstream in Indian philosophy? So, and by the way, I'd like to draw your attention of the audience to two of my papers before I begin and come to the main subject. That is, I wrote a paper about, I think, 30 years back, re-accessing Abhinavagupta. And then another, Utpal's insights into aesthetics and its impact on Abhinavagupta's aesthetic speculation. It was only prompted from this particular point of view, how Abhinavagupta evolves a paradigm for his thought, in fact, and then how he structures entire creativity into that mold. So from that point of view, it is very important, and Professor Paturi made some very important point, but this is because of the paucity of time. I mean, they were. I just wanted to make a few comments, but right now I think I should concentrate on my paper, on my presentation. I might remind, I mean, just to that on this very portal, on this very platform, INDICA afforded me an opportunity last year on the 7th of May on the conference, as a part of the conference on Shaivism, where I just talked about revisiting Abhinavagupta after 1,000 years. And I want to pick up the thread from where I left in that, in that lecture. So I'll be recapitulating a little bit and then I'll proceed. So you see, Abhinavagupta is known, as everybody knows, Abhinavagupta is very popular, and his impact is felt across all the, most of the disciplines in India. And he is known and mentioned in particularly Kashmir Shaivism, and Thrik is also known and mentioned. For example, Narad Puran, Shiv Puran, and we feel his impact. We feel and find his impact in Chol, Kerala, Maharashtra, Kamrup, Nepal, and in the books like Sangeet Ratnakar, Dattil, Bhav Prakashan, etc., etc. So, but you see, what surprises, and what should in fact surprise us shockingly, is that Abhinavagupta is nowhere part of the what we call the Shastriya Chintan Paddhati, or the part of the you see the Academy of Scholars, or Scholarly Academy, as regards philosophy. So in the field of the philosophical speculation, Abhinavagupta is not mentioned anywhere. And that's why this struck me that I should, I must try how to find, how do we situate Abhinavagupta in the mainstream Indian philosophy. Now, how do we go about it? So there are two ways to know. I'm just recapitulating a little, and then there are Sangrah Granthas, what we call compendia or compendiums, like Sarvdarshan Sangraha, Sarvdarshan Samuchaya, etc., etc. So this is one way in which the society or the knowledge tradition a general knowledge tradition recognizes one's contribution. Unfortunately, there is only one Sangraha Grantha, that is Sarvdarshan Sangraha by Madhava in 14th century, which mentions Pratyabhigya Darshan. And that is also in a very low key. Madhava's treatment of Pratyabhigya Darshan, one should not be very happy about it, or one should not, because he places it just only above he places even below Nyaya, etc. So that is it. Then, although you see, and again shocking, the Kalhan, barring the sole exception of Kallato, the author of Ispandakarika, no other person, right from Vasugupta down to Abhinavagupta, not to talk of lesser scholars like Shemraj. Shemraj is also a very great scholar in his own right, but still, not as great as Abhinavagupta. So, he nowhere mentions any scholar of Kashmir, this strict parampara like this. So this is this completely blacks out this tradition, which is so very important tradition. So that is one thing. Whereas when we come to Jairath in the 13th century, the commentator of Abhinavagupta, the author of the Vivek commentary, he is very boastful about the impact of Kashmir Shaivism across India. And he talks of, if you, all those students who have seen, all those scholars, everybody is reading the text published by Kashmir series of texts. And so here, and on the very first page, there is a verse from Jairath, which boasts of this, ki deshe nyasmin nadrishto ghusana visrivat sarvavandyatvam apo. Shri Somanandanatha Prabhiti Guruvara Adishta Sanniti Margu. Although I need not read the whole verse. So there he says ki this system this Ishvara Dvaitavado propounded by Somanand, etc. Is spreading, is sent throughout the country, just like saffron filaments that we have in Kashmir. And the pride, and it is a matter of pride for Jairath. This is the produce of Kashmir, and this anyasmin desha adrishtaha, because it is not seen anywhere else. I do not know what made Jairath make this comment, because you see, if you go throughout the country, you find Abhinavagupta everywhere, in art, in music, in tantra, in tantric practices, in sadhana, everywhere, but nowhere the hardcore philosophy that we call. So there's only the other way to know a tradition's contribution to a particular knowledge system of the country is how that system is treated by the other systems. And unfortunately, we don't find this mention, any Abhinavagupta's mention as a philosopher anywhere, except there is only one similar exception to this, and that exception is Swami Shankar Chaitanya Bharati, but it is very late. In fact, he's published his book Darshan Sarvasva in only 1948. Somewhat 2005. Of course, there he is. He notices and underlines this fact. He says, although this is the system which is worthy of the highest accord and highest acclaim, but unfortunately, it could not get that prasiddhi that it deserved. And he chooses this particular this system, and is the theory of Swatantrya as a precursor, as a prima facie position, the strongest prima facie position to refute, to establish was Vivartavada. So that the only sole exception. So naturally, he makes three very important observations about Abhinavagupta there, and not of course Abhinavagupta, but about the Kashmir Shaivism. He makes three, that Sri Vidya is a sibling of the strict system. This system, rendered in philosophical terms, he says this is Vimarshatmak Prakashavad. A beautiful, beautiful description. Very so Vimarshatmak Prakashavad. And the third thing he makes, that the Shabda Brahmavada of Bhartrihari culminates into this Vimarshatmak Prakashavad. And that's why, and through Bhartrihari, Abhinavagupta also stands on the, on the joining threshold of the mainstream Upanishadic stream and the Tantric stream. So that is Sandhi Rekha. So this is the three observations he's making. So, but of course, I'm not going to. I'm muted.
No, Navjivan ji, please carry on. Now you are not.
No, you are not. For a few seconds you were muted.
So is it okay? Can you listen to me?
Ji sir, please go ahead.
Now you are audible.
Now you see, why Abhinavagupta, and this has been a very serious loss to the development and growth of Indian philosophy. Because you see, if you have a strong Purva Paksha, Uttar Paksha becomes stronger. And we lost this opportunity. You see, when Buddhism came to India, when grew in India, not came to India. So Buddhism was an energy booster. It acted as a Purva Paksha. It challenged all the paradigms of Indian thought systems existing. No Atma, no self, no Ishwar, no enduring substance. And this put all the Indian systems, whether of the realist refrain or the idealist refrain, on alert. And thereby you see, I think this exchange and counter exchange enriched both the systems. So it happened about 1000, in the early, when Abhinavagupta arrived on the scene. So that was the time of the second millennium of the growth of Indian philosophy. Classical. When I'm talking of in the terms of millennium, I'm talking about the growth of classical Indian systems. Now, this you see, we lost the opportunity, because had we had Abhinavagupta as a Purva Paksha, or the other Indian systems had the Abhinavagupta as the Purva Paksha, then you see the profundity, the intellectual depth, the metaphysical profundity, the theoretical creativity, the philosophical movement would have been tremendous, would have been, we can simply, so we lost that opportunity. Now, so today, that's a very important, today in the current scenario, now this is a challenge to all of us, that we should take up this challenge and let us see how we develop this system. So we should understand how. So to me, Abhinavagupta, despite his, the only description could be the wonder that he was Abhinavagupta. So that no way to describe such a multi-dimensional, or in fact, I should say the omnidimensional personality. But you see, Abhinavagupta is primarily and ultimately a philosopher. Because you see, when he writes his Tantraloka, when he introduces himself, so in his last work, we do not know what was his last work, his known last work, which he stamps with the date and time and everything. So where he describes himself as, again, कि पूर्ण व्याकरण अवगाहन शुचि, then what he says कि सत्तर्क मूलोन्मिषत् प्रज्ञा कल्पलता विवेक कुसुमई रभ्यर्चित देवताम. Now he says कि what is everything he has worshipped his heart deity. Why? With the flowers that blossom on the creeper of the wisdom, which grew or which was rooted in the Sattarka, right logic. So Sattarka, Mulon, Mishat, Pragya, Kalpalata, Viveka, Kusumai, Rabdhir, Hadyadam. And then when he wraps up his entire philosophical sojourn and journey, then he says, in the same verse, कि पीयूषा संसार महासाहित्य सौंदर्य, then विश्राम्याम्यहम अद्वय कथा कांथा सखा संप्रतम. Now I am resting with in the embrace of my beloved. And who is my beloved? Advaya Katha. This is the story of the non-dualism, Ishvara Advaya Katha. So he wraps up the whole. When he comes his Tantraloka, he begins his Tantra. In the very first time, he introduces a subject. He says, you see, we have been talking of the spiritual discipline and sadhana, etc. Now you see, in Kashmir Shaivism, our entire personality is a combination of two, or in a fusion of two. It's not a combination. It's a fusion of two, rather. And what is it? What that is? Bodha Jnana and Paurusha Jnana. So Paurusha Jnana is our existential consciousness, and Bodha Jnana is our intellectual consciousness. So both together make a complete person. So now you see, now in order to achieve that, he says, what is it? Tatha vidha. Now I'll read 3 verses from Tantraloka, and then you will see how they outline the entire, you can say, the entire roadmap of a philosophical roadmap of Abhinavagupta. Tatha vidhav sayatma Bauddha Vijnana Sampade. I think my watch is, it's working. Okay. So, Tatha Vidhav Sayatma Bauddha Vijnana Sampade Shastra Meva Pradhanam Yad Gyeya Tattva Pradarshakam. Tatha Vidhav Sayatma Bauddha Vijnana Sampade. To develop that kind of Bauddha Vijnana, intellectual knowledge, that can produce that kind of certitude and certainty. For this we need Shastra, which is the only, which is capable of presenting entire what is to be known. Yad Gye Tattva Pradarshakam. And then he says, how I to present this Gye Tattva? He says, Iti Yad Gye Satatvam Darshate Tat Shivagyaya Maya Swasamvit Sattarko Pati Shastra Trivakrama. Now that Gye Satatva is going to be presented by me with recourse to Sattarka, right knowledge, Pati Swasamvit, my own experience, personal meditation and experience, and then the Pati Shastra and Trik in this order. And then why he needs to do this? He says, Yatah Shastra Kramat Tadgyo Guru Pragyanushīlanāt Atma Pratyaitam Jnanam Punatvat Bhairavayate. He says, why? Because if we learn this knowledge from the Shastra Kram and from the Guru who has mastered this Shastra Kram, and then who has contemplated over this knowledge and developed into a type of firm conviction of self-realization, he becomes full, complete, perfect, turning himself into Bhairavhood. So he says, Atmat Pratyaitam Jnanam Punatvat Bhairavayate. He becomes Bhairav. So now this is the journey he is taking. So this is now this is the Shastra that he is going to present. And we call this Shastra Trika. Now, you see, there are two ways how this is to be presented. So the tradition, now tradition takes, the philosophical, the systematic identity of a system, we call it a Shastra or a Prasthana. So that's why I'm just going to discuss, just trying to enter into that. In texts, for example, we have the text by Pratyabhigya Hriday, and then the Tantra, the Tantraloka, etc., etc. Abhinavagupta and other scholars are trying to have a kind of an internal synthesis of the Shastras, and then trying to put them in a kind of a vertical hierarchy, saying which one. And so this is one where they are placing themselves. So they will say that Sankhya is just like Sankhya, they assign Sankhya to the category of Buddhi, and but what is but for at this, and there's a long debate on it, and so much space, particularly the Tantraloka corpus, which Tantraloka corpus means Tantraloka, Tantrocha, Tantrasar, then so all the Malini Vijayavartik and Paratrinshka Vivaran. So this is the Tantraloka corpus. Now, in this Tantraloka corpus, he is trying to bring out this internal synthesis among the Shastra, among the various traditions of Shaivism, sister traditions, and of course some non-sister traditions as well, and then trying to put Trik on the highest. But I think, and he adopts so many parameters to judge, not one, so many parameters, at least 4 or 5 of them, but this is not time to recount them at the moment. So that's one way of looking at the how Abhinavagupta or the Kashmir Shaivists place themselves into the body philosophic of India. So where the another way, so but at the right now, I'm not going to look into this because that will need, I think we should have a separate discussion on this. Then his other corpus, which we call the epistemological or philosophical corpus of the text, represented by the Pratyabhigya text. For example, his Utpala's text, Karika, Vrati, and Vivrati, and Abhinavagupta's text, Vivrat Vimarshini and Vivrat Vimarshini. So this makes the Pratyabhigya corpus. Now, this corpus is very important for us to situate Abhinavagupta in the main line Indian philosophy. So I'm coming direct to that, and then we will see where the problem arises. You see, Abhinavagupta, toward the end of his Vivrat Vimarshini, makes some very important observations. I'll take one of them. He says that the genes and DNA of Kashmir Shaivism, or Pratyabhigya system, comes from the main line, mainstream. So this the very structure, he says, is in fact imbibed from the mainstream Indian philosophy. And in this mainstream Indian philosophy, mark this is very important, he is including the Nigam and Agam, both the traditions. Because you see, he has to centrally, in fact, he has to establish Kashmir Shaivism in the center of all knowledge systems of India, philosophical knowledge systems of India. So that's why he's taking both Agam and Nigam. Now he says, what he says, he makes very important statement. There is asmistu sati. Asmistu sati. I think you can put your videos on. I mean, because it doesn't look. It looks because then it looks that everybody is participating. Otherwise, you see, so it's not very reciprocative. So I'm so feel now. Asmistu sati agameshu dvaita vyakhyanam apasya brahmavade avidyam maya shakti kritya vigyana dvayam atmeshwarabhik prayena nirupya siddhyati eva janaha. Now what it says, this being so, what we need to do, we need to discard and disregard the dualistic interpretation of the agamas, and we have to transform avidya, in the sense of the Upanishads, into the Maya Shakti. And mark you, the word is using the Shakti. So Maya Shakti, as an aspect of the Shiva's autonomy, you can say. So Maya avidyam Maya Shakti kritya, and Vijnana Dvayam, the Vijnana idealism, I mean the Yogacara idealism, the subjective idealism, the Vijnana of Yogacara. And if we can reinterpret the Vijnana of Yogacharas as Atma and Ishvara, then my purpose is served. Siddhyati eva janaha. And he says, then he makes it again. He says, in fact, what this statement which I am making is acceptable and should be acceptable to all. He says, ki parameshwareshu tavad agameshu. He repeats, Shaiva Vaishnava rahasyeshu vedanteshu cha spashta ev uktoyam asmad ukto arthaha. Everybody is repeating, or everybody is saying what I am propounding, we are propounding. And not only the homogeneous systems of India, the orthodox systems, I'm not homogeneous, orthodox systems of India, but even the heterodox systems of India also toe the same line. Ukto tadanusarena eva sugatena uktam. So now this is the you see the big picture he is creating before us. In fact, Abhinavagupta visualizes his system as Atma Jnana Shastra, science of soul, science, spiritual science, and also describes it as Adhyatma Vidya. So you say, okay, now he makes it, and now with these twin concepts, he tries to enter, tries to open the gateway of the, you could say, the mainstream Indian philosophy. He says, I don't want to read everywhere because that will take time. So I'm just, then he says, what is the meaning of Atma Jnana Shastra? He says there are two implications of Atma Jnana Shastra. One, that the purpose of Shastra is to establish or to account for the Vyavahara. And the purpose of the epistemology or Pramana is to remove the delusion or the obscurity over our mind and understanding. So that is the Moha Pasarana. And you see, I'll just Professor Nagaraj was mentioning this. Now, this Moha Pasarana is a very strong paradigm in Rasa Shastra when we talk of the 7 Vignas of the Rasa. Because what these removal of Rasa Vignas is done, it is only the Moha Pasarana Matra. It is only the Atma Samvit Prakatana Matra, nothing else. So this is the, no. So he says that the prime function of the Atma Jnana. And what is the function of the Adhyatma Vidya? He's making a distinction. He says that the function of Adhyatma Vidya is to discuss, to bring in, to focus, to focus, to bring it into light, both the aspects of the subjective consciousness, Shuddha and Ashuddha. Now he says, and he emphatically, कि प्रमातुर ही शुद्धा शुद्ध रूपम वितत्य वक्तव्यम अध्यात्म विद्यासु अस्यैव अर्थस्य विमुख्यत्वेन विस्तारेण अर्हत्वात्. Now this is the prime, this subjective consciousness. So to consider the subjectivity both in aspects of, so this, now this, and then they says, that's why he says, the original, the primary, the first, the foremost function of philosophy is to understand consciousness and reality only in non-dualistic terms. Now you see, look at the language which he is using and how clear he is. He says, Tattva hi pratham kalpike ihi upadeshye. The first ever upadesh that we are thinking of making. Samvin mukhena adau advayam upadeshyam. Now we must talk of the advaya on that too. What type of advaya? Non-duality of consciousness. Samvin mukhena advaya upadeshyam. So that is the, so look at. Now he, again, what he does, he tries to distinguish what kind of system he is going to use. So he distinguishes himself. Now coming to, he is nearing his goal, closing in further, and then he says, what he is saying, that there are two types of, when we talk of the non-dualistic systems, which are dealing with the consciousness. So there are two types of systems. So one category is the general category, and the other category is the what we call the special category. Now he says, my system belongs to the special category, as against the general category. The word for general is samanya, and the word for special is vishesha. So he says, and he brackets himself with the Shaktadvaya Pradhana. So Shakti does not mean Shiva and Shakti, both are taken together. So Shaktadvaya Pradhaneshu. So he says, now, I represent the special category of non-dualism, which is represented by the Shaktas. And how it is distinguished from the Samanya. How it is, now he says there are two. In Samanya, the consciousness is only transcendent. The consciousness is marked and defined by its transcendence. So, whereas, and it is a pure consciousness. But in our systems, this consciousness is marked by Shakti, is defined by Shakti. So this is the mark of Shakti, Shakti Lakshana. This is something that acts as, you can say, as a demarcation. So now I'm going to read this. It's very important. He's making this statement. Ishwar Devabratamashni Shaktadvaita Pradhaneshu Vishesha Shakti Lakshanaha Atmano Darshate Sakshatkaram Niyate Yeshu Shuddha Nishkalata Shuddha Chaitanyam iti Samanya Darshaneshu Sarvotirna Rupaika Vedakeshu Darshita iti Suchayati. So he says, it is the transcendent subject that is being discussed in the Samanya and general systems, whereas in Kashmir Shaivism, we are discussing the Advaita, which is defined and characterized by Shakti. Now he says that this is very important to underline, because he says, and he says, look here, this is, you say, he says that This is a demarcating sign, this is demarcating characteristic, this is defining. Ityesha hi no sankhya napi vedantiki apitu shaivi evo. This is the subject, this is the mark, this is the demarcation, this is the identification of a Shaiv system which is being propounded by us. And then he says, what is the importance of this Shakti Lakshana? Only in one word. He says, Ki Shaivi Visarga Shakti Revacha Paramananda Bhumi Bijam. He makes this statement as Paratrishka Vivarna. Ki Visarga Shakti. Why? The power of creativity is the source of and seed of the Paramananda. So creativity and Ananda, these two things mark this Shakti. And this Shakti defines this consciousness propounded by or theorized by Kashmir Shaivism. He says, and again, every time he is making this, and then he says, no, ayamatta pradhana videya. This is the, this is the first contention, this is the topmost contention that this system makes, that atra pradhana videya. So, and this, then what happens? Nothing short of a miracle. This Shakti is reduced into Swatantriya. He says, this Swatantriya, what we can call autonomy. I think that will be a better term. So Shakti is reduced in autonomy. And then this Shakti, Swatantriya, is contrasted with Vivarta, Parinama, Pratibimba, everything. And he says, now this is, so what has happened? Shakti defines the ontology and Swatantriya, Swatantriya defines the ontology of the system. And this ontology is rendered into the terms, are discussed by propounded in the terms of Swatantriya, leads to its phenomenology of Abhasvat. So, and in terms of, because here in Kashmir Shaivism, everything is an Abhasa. The only Nirabhasa is Paramashiva. Nirabhasat Purnat Ahamiti Purabhasayati. So this is the way we, what happens then? The ultimate reality, Shiv, the ultimate reality, the consciousness, does not remain the only transcendental beyond this world. It becomes immanent in this world. So we have both the formations or both the formulations of reality of Vishwotirana and Vishwamaya, transcendental and immanent. So that is the way proceed. Then he says one thing again. How, you see, why so? You see, we have been talking about the aesthetics, we have been talking about the Rasa Shastra, we have been talking about so many things. Why so? So Abhinavagupta roots everything this in his philosophy. How does he do it? He says, you see, now this, you see, he's talking. It's just, I don't know how much time we will be having, but let me, I'm just, what I'm doing, I'm only just putting headlines. So, and then at some other point of time, we can elaborate on those headlines. So let's see those captions and just trying to interlink those captions, trying to make them. For him, you see, the reality is not nirvishesha. It is a term from Indian philosophy. Everybody, student knows. I mean, it's just not. It's not like Shankar's philosophy. I mean, he is talked, because you see, he's talked about the Vishesha, and this Vishesha is Shakti Lakshana. So the philosophy could not be nirvishesha. So that's why he says how. And he says so even when we are having mystic experiences, every experience is throbbing with life, is full of life. That's the beauty of Abhinavagupta. Otherwise, he would not comment on Abhinavabharati. He would not comment on Tantraloka. So Tantraloka is as much a part, Abhinavabharati is as much a part of his thinking as Kashmir Shaivism or his trick or Pratyabhigya or everything. So he's saying, he says, he says the Advaya that Kashmir Shaivism propagates is pulsating with life. Advayam upakrantam. So he says, no, why? He said that this Advaya, which we have been talking about, this Vishwotin and in Vishwa. Everything, why? That's why the Vishwameta becomes important here, that it pulsates through our life. It permeates through our life. So that's why he says, and right from the mystic beginnings, from the Agamas, down the philosophical treatment and the aesthetic experiences and aesthetic treatment and elaborations, it is that reality is throbbing everywhere. So that's why he says, why he says, it's beautiful. He says, it is only subjecting philosophy on the touchstone of life, of a touchstone of a living person, making it a part of the experience of a living person, making a part of a living experience. Only then we can understand philosophy and appreciate it. So how is it? Now I'll read a few portions. Because, you see, sometimes I didn't want to read all those portions, but sometimes it becomes very necessary because you miss the spirit, the force that they bring into their words is not brought into the translations. So so look at this. Parama bhumi ragameshu. I'll read this is a slightly longer, a longer statement, but just Parama bhumi ragameshu, parama rahasya visati. Although the param bhumi is parama rahasya, is mystic, you can say, but it does not mean that it doesn't become a part of experience. Naiva anabhasamana apitu abhasamanaivo iti tatparya. How? Kate Purushe with now he's reconciling with the Vedas, referring to the Vedas, and yet bringing the entire Vedic knowledge into his own fold. And they say, Purushe Vedam Sarvam, idyat avisheshen yat advayam upakrantam, tat no samyak adhirohati hridayam. That does not enter into our hearts. Why? Because you make the Purush transcendental. Make the Purush immanent, a part of our life. Tasmat. That's why. Jivat bodha sopana vyavadhaneno chadvaya vidhanam ujitam. We are making this statement of non-duality only through the vyavadhan, through the intermediation of jivat bodha, knowledge, experience of living persons who are alive. Making it a part of life. Now you can understand why Abhinavagupta is writing on Abhinavabharati, why he is writing his Abhinavabharati on Natya Shastra. Because he's making a part of life. Why is he indulging in the tantric practices? Because he's making it a part of life. So why is writing on the Tantraloka? Because the language, without language, the life is not there. So he's making it a part of life. So that's why he says, Jivat bodha vyavadhaneno advaya vidhanam uchitam. So that is it. So now you see, what he says, now this consciousness, what says, a part of our life, what we call advaya, it is an affirmative expression of life. It is so it is you can say it is an affirmative expression of life. And then you see, for this the sadhan, that is Shakti. That's why we don't distinguish the Shakti and Shiva. Without Shakti, Shiva is Shiva. So that's why the sadhan is Shakti, which is, in philosophical terms, we call it Swatantriya, and in tantric terms, we call it Aishwarya. So it is through the Shakti that now that's why he says, now look at when Utpal Deva he proclaims in his Ishwar Tattva Vigya Karika, iti sughat maya prakatito esh maya iti sughat esh prakatito maya iti prakatito maya sughat esh margo navo. When he says, now I have launched a new path, I have propounded a new system. So what is this Navata there? So this Navata is this, this Aishwarya becomes the Naveen Marga. This is the Aishwarya. This is that's why he's saying, what is this Navaha? So Durghat Karitva Lakshanameva Aishwaryam. This Aishwarya is defined by Shakti. And this Aishwarya, you see, so there's a Durghat Karitva, so Yortha, so etc. So that's why you say, that's why he says, now this Aishwarya, this Swatantra, this freedom, it becomes the new path of philosophical thinking. So that is the one thing. And that's why you see, he names his system as Swatantra Dvaitavada. If we are trying to find out a term, philosophical term for Kashmir Shaivism, then it is Swatantra Dvaitavada. And this is term coined by Abhinavagupta himself, none else. Now he says, Etad adhikarana siddhanta disha. Etad adhikarana siddhanta disha Swatantra Chidadvaitam api siddhet. Iti samasta shastrartha siddhi. So now look at this. Now here we come. Now when we are talking about this Swatantra Chidadvaitavada, where do we place it in Indian philosophy? So let us see. Let us see what kind of consciousness Abhinavagupta talks of. You see, this is the point at which I ended my talk at yours. So I spoke about 5 or 7 minutes on this as well. There are 3 great scholars, modern scholars, Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya, K.C. Bhattacharya, Professor T.R.V. Murthy, and Professor Ashok Kumar Banerjee. So these these 3 scholars have written a lot on this. Now, I'm taking cue from them and then trying to give what important contribution Abhinavagupta makes and where do we place him. You see, what is the nature of the philosophical absolute that Abhinavagupta is talking about? And where do we place? Because when we call it Swatantra Chidadvaitavad, we have 3 words here. One is Swatantra means autonomous, Chit is consciousness, and Advaitvad means non-dualism. So we are talking about the non-dual reality, which is conscious and which is free. So that is the big, you can say that is a picture in which we are trying to situate our notion of reality and our notion of ultimate reality. Now with this, so K.C. Bhattacharya was a very, I mean, of course, he's the father of the modern Indian philosophical studies. So he talks of he wrote a very famous article. I mean, in fact, it's a famous chapter. He wrote articles and then they were collected into a book, Studies in Philosophy, into volumes by his son, Gopi. Now, so as way back as 1905, he wrote the concept of the absolute and its alternative forms. And there he said, he calls it, technically, he calls it the doctrine of trinal absolute. So that is the term that he is trying to use. And of course, his basic ideal or model, you can say, is Advaita of Shankara. Now he says there are three. I will not be going into great detail because I will like to, because the time that I allotted to me, just try to just complete, just making some references, recapitulating what I have said at that time, and just adding a little more wherever is necessary. In fact, one needs to speak only on these three models itself, and then situate Abhinavagupta's thought, how, but perhaps the time frame won't allow to do this, so it's for some next time. So now we have this knowing, feeling, and willing. There are three types of consciousness. There are three types of consciousness: knowing, feeling, and willing. And these are, he says, these are the exclusive types. They cannot be subsumed, or one cannot include or subsume the other consciousness. So they exclude each other. So there are three types of consciousness. And because of these three types of consciousness, we can conceive or think of three types of absolutes. So, I mean, we can say knowing absolute, feeling absolute, or the willing absolute. So they are the three kinds. So and they're alternate forms. One will, so now, then what it says, although they're alternate forms, but in our daily life, we never realize them, or we never achieve them, we realize we never get them in their pure form. We always find them a fused and mixed form. So they are intermixed always. Now, if we want to have, then we have to absolve them of their impurity. That's why you see, this is the impurity that surrounds everything. So we have to absolve the reality from its impurity, and then we can have a pure knowledge, pure feeling, and then the pure willing. So that is the framework. Now, you see, there's a very important thing he makes. The core value of the knowing consciousness is truth. The core value of the willing consciousness is freedom or sat. And the core value or core element of the feeling consciousness is value. So that is the way K.C. Bhattacharya puts it. Of course, he is not making reference to any system. He is not making. Now, what happens to identify this with the systems becomes the responsibility of his student, you can say, because Professor T.R.V. Murthy was attending his lectures in Amalner, which Professor Bhattacharya was usually delivering. So he in fact he has acknowledged his debt to Professor Bhattacharya. So now, he wrote another paper. His paper was Knowing, Feeling, and Willing as the Functions of Consciousness. In fact, Professor Bhattacharya himself sowed the seed of this, because Professor Bhattacharya himself says that these are the three functions of consciousness on which we can conceive the alternative forms of absolute. Now, in fact, but this was brought into, detailed and to a greater analysis by Professor T.R.V. Murthy. And in this, and in fact, Professor Bhattacharya acknowledged one thing. He acknowledges that he is under the impact of, and in terms of the transcendental psychology, he's using the word. There are two terms which he's using, that a priori psychology or a transcendental psychology. So he says in terms of he is thinking of the consciousness in terms of transcendental psychology, and he is trying to understand the functions of consciousness in this. Professor Murthy makes it elaborate and makes it more clear, and which again, although Professor Murthy does not acknowledge it, that he is under the impact of the psychology, but it comes to the, it becomes the responsibility or Professor Ashok Kumar Chatterjee. So Professor Chatterjee, it comes to, he identifies the nature of the school of psychology which impacted the thought of Professor Bhattacharya and Murthy, and also then he identifies these types of special different consciousness with different systems. So that is the, now you see what happens in psychology. These are the attitudes of minds. But what Professor Chatterjee points out, in fact, Professor Murthy and Professor Bhattacharya, although they are relying on this transcendental psychology, which in fact Professor Chatterjee identifies as the faculty psychology of the medieval ages. So, but he says that although Professor Murthy and Professor Bhattacharya both are relying, taking their inspiration from the psychology, yet they are making very important deviation to make a foray into philosophy. And this important deviation is not only the function of mind, to which the faculty psychology was limited. It is the function of mind in its relation to the object presented to it. Now he said this becomes a philosophical problem. Because what is the function of philosophy? The philosophical problem is, you say, subject-object. How subject reacts to an object. How an object is visualized with the subject. So this is the whole philosophy, you see. What is this? The whole philosophy can be turned into three terms. It is the subject, grahya, grahak, and then it is the grahya, grahak, and then it's samvikti, graham. How you grasp this grahya and grahak. So this is the relation, and this is this tripartite, this triangular relationship makes the entire saga of philosophy is woven around by this triangle. So that's why he says how mind reacts to this. Now what happens in knowing consciousness? In knowing consciousness, an object is known by the subject, but the object known is free from the intervention of subject. Subject receives the object as it is presented to the subject. That's all. The subject doesn't contribute anything to it. So that's why you say, what Acharya Shankar says. Acharya Shankar says it is Vastu Tantram Jnanam. The Jnana is Vastu Tantram. It is Vastuna Yathatma Vijnanam. It is the Vijnana Vastu as presented to consciousness, that's all. The consciousness does not contribute to it.
Professor Rastogi, it is a very unpleasant duty to remind during such a flow of thought. But I think you are towards the conclusion.
Okay.
You are wrapping up. Yeah.
I have how many? 5 minutes? 10 minutes?
5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Right. Fine. Because you see, I'm sorry. The problem is when you deal with this topic or you raise a question, until unless you develop a topic, a subject, is very, because I think this is the point at where I left that speech. So, but anyway, now you see, I leave this. So there are 3 types. I'll finish because that's very important, because I have to, until unless I propound what Abhinavagupta has said and where we place this system, that becomes very difficult. But anyway, let me finish. So in willing consciousness, the object becomes a creation of the consciousness. The consciousness wills an object. It creates an object. That's it. And in a feeling consciousness, the both are at the par. So subject and object, both are at the same level. And then you say, okay, what happens? Their distinction disintegrates into unity. So that is, so now you see why this has become important. Because Abhinavagupta also talks of Advaitvada and also talks of the Advaita, non-duality of consciousness. And this, when we talk of non-duality of consciousness, he talks of this consciousness as dynamic and creative. And because of his dynamicity and creativity, it also leads to the production. You see the emergence of beauty. That's the most important part. Because you see, why Abhinavagupta thought of writing on aesthetics? What made him to write on Natya Shastra? What made him to write on Tantraloka? So because it says, as Kavyanubhava, as Kalanubhava, is a part of our experience where subject and object merge into each other. They become one. So this unity can be realized even in philosophy. So because this aesthetics becomes a model for the spiritual and metaphysical experience of it. So that is very important. So that's it, and that's why the Swatantra is so important. Swatantra as a function of autonomy is very important in Tantra and etc. But what's the function in aesthetics? Had there not been a Swatantra, then the Sakshat Karpa Swaha would have not been possible through rasa. So, but these are the things that we, so I think the only question in philosophy remains, because Abhinavagupta terms his system, as we have seen, to Swatantra Chidadvaitavada. Now, can this be reduced? I mean, can be, where do we place this kind of, this categorization of ultimate consciousness or absolute in terms of mainline philosophy? So the Abhinavagupta's short answer would be, because unless we discuss the notion of this consciousness, how it functions, because of in Utpal's terms and in Abhinavagupta's terms, the consciousness is an activity and consciousness is an agency, both. Consciousness acts as an agent and consciousness acts as an activity. When it acts as an activity, it functions, all the domain of rasa, all the aesthetic domain is characterized by consciousness as an activity. But all the domain of mantra shastra and all the domain of language is characterized by consciousness as agency. So, I mean, those are the things. But I think the time is short, so naturally. So what I'm trying to make the, just in 2 minutes, I'll say, the concept of Abhinavagupta of consciousness are absolute, which has known aesthetic margins, not margins, I should say, which is in fact characterized by aesthetics. And the greatest importance of Abhinavagupta and his tradition is this, how Abhinavagupta defines philosophy in terms of aestheticization. According to this tradition, aestheticization is the definition of philosophical thought. That's very important. And I'll request Professor Nagarajji to allow me to read just a small sentence from his Vivrati Vimarshini, where what he says when he is talking about the epistemology. When we know a thing, what happens? If we don't know, we enjoy, we savor. And how says, I mean, just he's talking, nanu tadevam bhutam. He says, knowing a thing prior to knowing and after the knowing. So he says, nanu tadevam bhutam anaswadita purvam aishwaryam aswad gochiri bhavati ityashanka. When you know a thing, you simply don't know. You relish it. You savor it. You see, so you characterize your knowledge. Oh, I understood it. So, I mean, it's not only in it. You see, you become, the delusion of your mind gets away. So, you see, it becomes mal rahita, vimal pratibhana. So what happens in aesthetics? The same thing happens in Shastra, in Darshan. So that is so I think now, according to Abhinava, he is trying to, and his tradition, he is trying to conceive a kind of consciousness which is, which cannot be molded into the old categories or the pre-existing categories or historical categories propounded by other scholars. So here we have this kind where we have beauty, we have bliss, we have philosophical discussion, everything. So this kind of consciousness, where to play it, so this becomes a category by itself. And I think Abhinavagupta carves his own category in the mainline extreme philosophy, within the fold of non-dualism, but defining the non-dualism anew in a different way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. May I request you humbly with folded hands that we would love to host you once again, only you, for 5, 6, whatever number of hours you wish to grace us with. And we'll make sure that your previous recording and this recording is shared with the audience registered members in advance, so that they are prepared and you do not have to, bring them up to speed. So I'm really apologetic that we had to, kind of break the flow, but I would love to invite you here in front of everyone and to another long session and definitely grace us with this beautiful knowledge that you have shared. Nagarajji, with your permission, do we have time for a Q&A? We have few questions here.
Sure. Why not? Yes.
So There's one anonymous attendee who asks that it's a very basic question, and I might have missed the answer in the many-layered talk by Rastogi ji. Why was Abhinavagupta not regarded as a philosopher?
No, he was regarded. Can I answer?
Yes, of course, sir.
Yeah, there was a long answer given by Professor Rastogi for that. He gave all the history of why he did not get the place in the departments of philosophy.
So essentially, I think they have missed it.
Yeah, the audience who is putting this question probably missed that part of the talk.
May I say some?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
You see, sometimes what happens, I think some aspects of Abhinavagupta were overemphasized. For example, his contribution to aesthetics. For example, his contribution to the tantras. Because you see, as a tantric, he impacts the tantric system, tantric practices all over the country. Although he may not be that famous that way, but you see, go anywhere. So whether it is Kerala, whether it is Cholo, whether it is Maharashtra, whether it is Gujarat. So and similarly, of course, his impact on aesthetic, on poetics, for example. You see, there is a basic question. Professor Paturi answered this question to an extent, but I have some different answer to it also, slightly just additional. So, because why Abhinavagupta wrote Lochan on Tantraloka? You see, very strange, very strange. Why is strange? Because Anandavardhan was a Vaishnava and Abhinavagupta was a Shaiv. Anandavardhan, you see, look at the Mangalacharana, everything. He doesn't make it. So Ya Vai Paschati, etc., etc. I mean, all those. But Abhinavagupta chose to write because you see, why? Because the doctrine of freedom that he's talking, how translate this doctrine of freedom in terms of language? And it is the language dhvani that frees even the the language of our day-to-day usage from its constraints and shatters and fetters and bondage, and makes us free. There is no bound. There is no. There are no boundary lines. There are no. You see, now the dhvani is there, and that's how you remember. There's one thing very, very strange in Tantraloka. When he is trying to explain, when Abhinavagupta is explaining Anandavardhana's notion of dhvani, then throughout Tantraloka, Anandavardhan quotes Utpal Dev only once. And while quoting on once, he renders entire dhvani in terms of pratyabhigya. And the definition of pratyabhigya that Abhinavagupta accords in Tantraloka Lochan is nowhere found in the Kashmir Shaivism text. Nowhere. He doesn't make it. So why he shows? And then he makes it a Visheshata Anusandhan. Of course, I'm not going to those details. So that's why he says, because his the notion of freedom can be translated into the linguistic discourse and the power of language and the faculty of language, even in our day-to-day usage in our poetry. And the best description could be through this dhvani. And that's why he goes to Anandavardhan, takes dhvani from him, and then, of course, writes Lochan on it.
Thank you, Navjivan ji.
Other questions in the Q&A box probably we can take up later.
Yeah, that's what Nagaraji, I wrote to the two individuals from the audience that in the evening, if there is time, they could ask their question again. Or if for some reason we are not able to address that, probably they could even mail us. So we'll share that mail ID.
At what time in the evening you will be having these questions?
So the whole intervention continues. So after you, Honorable Angiras ji will be speaking, and we'll keep continuing. So if there is some time, because we're kind of running late, which is fine, but so we will continue till late. So if there is time towards the end,
I apologize to the speakers and the audience both. For taking so much time. Okay, thank you.
Normal. It's natural for such a waterfall of knowledge. It can't be stopped that way. Actually, my father was also like this, and if it were my father, he would have yelled at me for stopping him. Thank you for not yelling at me.
Thank you, Navjivan ji, and thank you, Nagaraj ji.